Hereby, I open this academic ceremony at Maastricht University. First of all, I welcome Mrs. Joy Lee. She will defend her thesis, The Medical Pause in Simulating Training. And I welcome also all the members of the degree committee, in particular, the three supervisors, Professor Jeroen van Merrijenboer, he is Professor of Learning and Instruction at Maastricht University. Professor Halska Jarotska, she is Professor of Instructional Design of Online Learning at the Open University in Heerlen, also in the Netherlands. And Dr. Jeroen Donkers, he is Senior Lecturer at the Department of Educational Development and Research and the School of Health Professions Education, also at Maastricht University. And I will introduce the 5 opponents later during the opposition. Welcome to the audience, all the followers of the live stream. Mrs. Yeonjoo Lee, may I invite you to give a summary of your thesis? Please go ahead.
Dear Prorector, dear members of the Corona, dear family, friends and audience, in the next 15 minutes, I will shortly present my PhD project, which is about the medical pause in simulation training. The concept of the medical pause starts from timeouts. Let's take some time to think about what timeouts mean. Timeouts are a cooling off period that takes time away from a tense, heated, or stressful situation. In sports, they are one of the useful strategies that changes the game flow. Coaches call for timeouts to reorganize their teams, discuss strategies, and plan what to do next. More importantly, they use timeouts to interrupt the negative momentum where their teams are losing points sequentially. The same ideas goes for timeouts in medicine. By using timeouts strategically, practitioners reorganize themselves in the heat of moments, reflect on their performance, and plan what to do next in order to fix current struggles and enhance patient safety. Closely related to safety culture, timeouts have been applied to various fields involving checklists or protocols for teamwork. Not only these formal timeouts, informal and individual pauses can be also regarded as a type of timeout, where you slow down and stop your own practice for a while to be mindful and circumspect. Encompassing these topics, I introduced the new terminology, the medical pause. In short, the medical pause is a break taken during medical procedures, formally or informally, and collectively or individually to enhance practitioners' performance. This PhD project aims to improve the understanding of the medical pause by investigating why it is important, what are the effects of pausing, and why and how we train it as a professional skill. For this project, 5 studies were carried out, which I'll describe one by one. In the first study, I established a theoretical and psychological understanding of the medical pause. Let's assume that you're a surgeon performing in a timeline and see how your cognitive load changes. Cognitive load means how much your brain is occupied by various processes. It should be higher than some minimum requirement. and also lower than the maximum brain capacity to stay at an optimal level. At some point, you encounter a difficult problem in the middle of the surgery. Then the cognitive load goes higher and you're overloaded. Or maybe you're distracted by conversation with your colleagues and become inattentive, leading to underloaded. To interrupt this negative momentum, a pause comes in. If overloaded, you should relax and calm down yourself during the pause. Whereas in case of underloaded, you should boost your thinking process through self-reflection. By coping with this fluctuating cognitive load, you can balance yourself to maintain the positive momentum. In fact, taking a pause is not an easy skill that involves diverse psychological processes. First, you have to be a good decision maker who plans or improvises pauses at the right timing, using clinical reasoning and time management and self-monitoring. Moreover, once a pause is taken, you should use relaxation or reflection properly to keep the balance. Undoubtedly, to learn this complex skill, a designated learning environment should be provided, especially for novices. I suggest computer-based simulations such as Thesis games or virtual reality as a promising learning environment for this. They can easily adapt learning content, provide quick access to it, and store data so that you can trace your learning progress in long term. Moreover, pause function can be easily implemented in any computer systems so that learners can repeatedly practice the medical pause in a safe environment. Before we go for investigation of pause effects in simulation, the simulation I use should be validated if it fits the research purposes, which is the main goal of the second study. I used ABCDE Sim, a simulation game for emergency medicine. Although this game has been used in many training programs for years, it has not been known if it can evaluate users' professional performance. So I recruited two groups of people, residents as experts and medical students as novices, and let them play this game to compare their performance in the game. Performance measures are developed in 4 categories based on educational theories. Then I interpreted them into specific indicators by using game logs and eye tracking. For instance, I applied a machine learning technique to evaluate how users play the game in a systematic manner. Eye tracking was used to measure how users select information, which is important or irrelevant, by looking at different items in the screen. The results shows that the experts perform significantly better than novices in all 4 categories, which means I can safely use this game to measure user performance in the following studies. Now I move on to the third study about pause effects, focusing on relaxation during pauses. First, I wanted to see what happens when there is a pause button just available. So I asked one group of medical students to play the game with a pause button, while the function is not available for the other group. The results showed the pause available group's performance was enhanced, while their cognitive load was also increased. It seems like students are rather struggling with thinking when to take a pause or what to do with the pause function. Interestingly, 50% of participants did not take a pause at all, while the other 50% did. So I looked at if there's any difference between these no pause taking and pause taking groups. Strangely, there was no difference both in performance and cognitive load. I assumed it might be due to the lack of specific guidelines for novices about what to do during pauses, so they couldn't find the point of improvement to make changes in their future performance. To confirm this assumption, I asked them why I didn't take any pauses. Their answers show that they are not even aware of how pausing can be beneficial. However, when looking at an individual participant's cognitive load changing throughout the performance, cognitive load significantly decreased, especially during an intense moment, which demonstrates that the learners are actually using pauses for relaxation, knowingly or unknowingly. Noticing that the pause effects are more complex than we thought, now we'll look at pauses for reflection. In this study, two groups of medical students played the same game. They took 3 times of pauses between a series of tasks. During these pauses, one group reflected on their own performance, while the other group did not. For the reflection group, I provided specific guidelines about how to take pauses effectively. The results show that the people in the reflection group performed better, but only in the third and last phase of the learning process. It seems reflective pauses can improve performance, but it takes some time for learners to be familiar with self-reflection, requiring an adaptation period. Lastly, I bridged the findings from the previous studies to another type of computer-based simulation, which is virtual reality. Virtual reality, or VR, is an emerging and powerful alternative for simulation-based training in medicine. But research on VR training is still in its infancy. For instance, real-time measures of cognitive load has not been established yet. So this study aimed to validate this measure for VR environment. To measure cognitive load via eye tracking in VR, I've developed a specialized technical setup that connects a built-in eye tracker and a photo sensor to a VR system, so that cognitive load can be reliably measured in real time. A group of students are invited and played a VR simulation. They performed 2 different tasks, which are easy and difficult. In the easy task, they just observe a scenario and report their observation. While in the difficult task, more elaborate reasoning and analysis of the scenario was required. As expected, the difficult task caused significantly higher cognitive load than the easy task, which means we can use this setup to measure cognitive load for future research on the medical pause in VR training. Now we arrive at the conclusion, and here are take-home messages. Taking a medical pause is a professional skill to balance yourself between being overloaded or underloaded in a heat-up moment. Computer-based simulation is a favorable learning environment to train this skill. For a performance measure in simulation training, cognitive load is one of effective indicators to use. To train the medical pause, well-designed instructions are required with an adaptation period provided. Thank you for your attention. I will now give the floor back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lee, for your interesting presentation. We will move now to the opposition. The first opponent is the chair of the Thesis Assessment Committee, Professor Aniek de Bruin. She is Professor of Self-Regulation in Higher Education at Maastricht University, and she is also Secretary of this degree committee. Professor de Bruin.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I would very much like to congratulate you with the completion of your PhD dissertation. It is truly impressive how you posed a contemporary yet very complex research question and how you use the multitude of complex and innovative methods to examine possible answers and distill some clear conclusions with a wealth of insightful research questions that move the field of pedagogical education, instructional design, self-regulated learning, and also cognitive load theory forward. I think your theoretical contribution to the field of cognitive load theory in chapter 2 is actually enough in itself to warrant you the degree of doctor, and is beyond what many PhDs achieve in a lifetime. But as you also noticed, we're not nearly there yet. And when it comes to understanding how learners manage effort and pause during task learning, but there's still a lot to investigate. Some of these questions to move forward, I would like to pose to you today. A first short question that I have relates to how you could position fatigue in your innovative model of cognitive load. And by fatigue, I do not refer to the working memory depletion that can be restored through, let's say, a short break, but the general tiring that happens as a result of prolonged concentration, energy exertion of the body, and that causes us to need 7 to 8 hours of sleep, at least at night. And in high stakes domains, such as medicine, this fatigue brings also potential risks. But in cognitive load, writing on this, including yours, the concept of fatigue is missing. And I'm, like you, interested in the effect of pausing on learning, and I struggle with how to position the concept of fatigue in thinking about cognitive load, thinking about repletion. I'm interested in hearing any thoughts you have on this matter.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for raising this important question. I suppose what you meant is how we can position the concept of fatigue, which can occur in more rather long term, and also very important to consider in medical professionals within this research, or my interpretation of cognitive load and medical pause. My answer is fatigue is a bit different concept, from working memory within short-term performance. And in my project, I more focused on short-term procedures and performance during the cognitive load changes during a performance. Although I acknowledge that regarding fatigue is important in long term, and some cognitive overload or struggles during a performance can affect fatigue in long term. And it can also occur during a performance, but it is fatigue is a more like a more broader concept, which can include your physical situations and more mental situations. So how we can position the concept of fatigue is more, it can include the management of cognitive load. So for instance, management of cognitive load can be done by using the medical pause. And if you use it correctly in all the procedures or in daily performance, fatigue can be positively reduced. And because it depends on how you define the causes of fatigue, of course, it can be caused by various reasons, not only the cognitive load or the overloaded working load, but also some social context or some more mental demanding. So it can be one cause of fatigue. And that's how we can position the concepts in a coordinated way. I hope it answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much. I'll go on to my next question, and this relates to your measurements of effort and how you interpret these as indicating relaxation or reflection. You show that allowing pauses affected cognitive load, only the objective measurement, the pupillometry, and not so much the self-report measure. Very interesting finding. And now you conclude based on this information whether and in what circumstances these pauses are used for relaxation and for reflection. I wondered though whether you can draw such strong conclusions based on these changes in pupil dilation. Is it really, are these two processes of relaxation and reflection really as opposed as you present them now? If I, for example, read cognitively taxing scientific work, such as your dissertation, and afterwards I take a short walk to think about it, I feel much more relaxed because I'm not investing this high effort, but at the same time, I'm strongly reflecting on it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for the accurate point. I also acknowledge that it is not the cognitive processes during pauses. It cannot be that dichotomically like relaxation or reflection. It is impossible in real life. The concept of relaxation in reflection is to describe some specific cognitive processes among many others. And of course, as you just pointed out, you can do both, like relaxation and reflection. And also relaxation can reduce your cognitive load or struggles. And reflection can also increase or even decrease. It can go both directions, because reflection is not just decreasing or increase cognitive load, but more like reorganizing yourself. So by reorganizing yourself doesn't mean like just very simply managing your cognitive load, but it has more meanings. So in my projects, I made rather strong definition as a relaxation and reflection, thanks to my well-controlled experiment setups as well. Since I wanted to start from the basic concepts that can be more clear, but and easy to explain the cognitive processes. And we start from this basic cognitive processes and we apply it to a real life. So it's a kind of starting point to apply to more generalized real life situations. So it is correct that it is too much simplified, but also it is a good start point to explain more complex processes in real life. So it can be mixed or it can go diverse directions, but it can still have that basic concepts that we can start understanding about the complex processes. So I hope this
in your context, is relaxation then the right term to use? If I look at the game you're using, the simulation game, whenever they pause, I can hardly imagine that they're not thinking about the game. And perhaps it's not always high level reflection that is going on that's going to change and affect how they continue the game. But true relaxation, in the way I see it, where they are completely distracted from the game, are thinking about something else, is that what is going on? Or is always some sort of reflection happening during this phase?
The concept of relaxation.
You may give a short answer, please.
Okay. This is a very specific situation where students encountered very unexpected and uncertain situation, which was seizure attack of patients. Then usually many medical students experience panic. And then in this specific situation is very different from normal learning processes. They automatically do pause and then they relax. Relax here means it's not consciously relaxed and thinking something else or distracted. It's more like coping yourself, not too much panic, and then go to more self-reflection later. So that was very specific situation within this scenario. So that was how I identified the relaxation process during the pause within that specific scenarios.
Thank you. Very clear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor De Bruin. The opposition will be continued by Professor Agneta Gould. She is Professor of Cognitive Science and Director of the Educational Technology Group at Lund University in Sweden. Professor Gould.
Thank you. Dear candidate, what you present is truly exciting and truly important work. And I think some of the most important and challenging aspects lie in what you have started out and point at regarding training novices to use pauses as professionals. But as you point out, it first, when a variety of aspects of what's being done are automatized, that you have the resources for self-monitoring, you can focus on signals, you can make decisions to take a pause. You can gain something because you have the relevant experiences, so you can reflect productively. Like you state, medical pausing is a professional skill that only experts with a developed clinical judgment and time management skills can use properly. But we have here the general challenge of understanding and supporting progress all the way from novices to the full experts. And I think we all tend to simplify a little by focusing on experts on the one hand and the real novices on the other. But how about the semi-experts, the semi-professionals? Now, in your studies, you have participants that some of them are in their second academic year, some are in their sixth, which might indicate different degrees of expertise, and I can't see that you really talk about that. Would you maybe expand a little or comment on that?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for pointing that out. If I understood correctly your question, what you wonder is that how we can lead the novice learners to the professional experts all the way through the spectrum, or I wonder if I understood correctly, is it question of how we train or lead them to the professional level, or how or something else? Would you please explain a bit again?
Yeah, of course. Well, what I'm after is, would there need to be more investigations maybe in what can be trained, what are the aspects of a medical pause that can be trained at different stages of the professional development? I mean, or is it just, I'm after what I think is maybe a simplification, novices or experts?
Yes, how we can train the novice learners with the medical pause is not that much explained in the experimental studies in my project, but more elaborated in the chapter 2, which is we can lead them by giving some scaffolding, because it's totally impossible for novices to recognize themselves, how much they can deal with the problems, and how they can make the pauses in the right manner. So what I suggested was providing the full support by supervisors or more experienced medical professionals. Like it can be two-folded, like giving them how to plan the pauses beforehand. So before you actually start the procedure or any medical practice, supervisors can teach novice learners how to plan when to take a pause and which timing it is more necessary. Then novices can follow that planning. The second point is that how to improvise the pauses can be taught by supervisors, like by experience the practice together. Like whenever novices can notice or observe how supervisors improvise pauses, they can learn in what kind of situation they can take pauses and what to do during the pauses. So in giving this scaffolding and support by external supervisors, they can step by step learn these professional skills. And in my chapter 3, the medical students didn't have any experience in emergency room or any real scenarios cases, while the experts who are residents who have experience in emergency room. So this is a big difference, because the scenario is a very unexpected and difficult for novices because they haven't experienced yet, while the residents have that experience. So that was why the experts could do much better, show the mastery of the skills, while novices couldn't. So the experts, like residents, can work like a supervisor who can lead these novices by implementing this training system within their educational programs.
Yes, thank you. So, and a related question, and you talked about this now in your presentation as well, that only half of the participants in the chapter 4 study who could take pauses did, and that they would say also in the questionnaire things like they didn't think that taking pauses would help. And what would you say? May they be correct in their judgment? They say it wouldn't help me. In that very situation.
If I understood your question correctly, if it is correct that the taking pause doesn't benefit or not, and in fact it does, especially for novices. But novices, the biggest problem of novices is that they don't know what problem is. So they cannot notice that this is a problem, so I have to take a pause. So the decision of taking pause should follow after they identify the problem first. So I can suggest that the reason why they thought the pause doesn't help or a pause is not necessary is that because they didn't notice the problem exists. So that was why they are novices and they couldn't define the problem itself. So they don't recognize the necessity of taking pauses. So that could be one explanation why they answer that way.
Yes, thank you. And that leads me up to my third question or maybe a suggestion that I would like to have your ideas
time
on?
is almost up, so you can just have a very short question.
Oh, that is, if one would say that at some point here, that modeling would be necessary actually for novices, that rather than doing things yourself, you would need a model to have modeling, and that maybe for that purpose, a film with a team, with experienced people who make decisional pauses. And because we have a film of educational purpose, you could also have that person saying what happens in their mind so that you can see the point of the pause. I think you have been touching upon that that might also be needed to support the unprofessionals. But then and my question maybe is, or this was my suggestion, maybe you would need to have that as well as simulations, because I mean, no one would question the value of simulations, but I can't really see how you could build that into a simulation. Or do you have another opinion on that?
Please be very short. We have to move on. So a short answer, please.
Yes, example-based learning or using modeling is very important for training novices with professional skills, of course, and using simulation to train this skill for novices is also very important. And how they are connected is that in simulations, you can implement many different kinds of support. And it's not different from the real life situations. You can provide some built-in support and instructions that can guide novices for the professional skills in approximately replicate the real situations in a safe environment. So that could be my answers for this, I hope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Goltz. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Mary Dankbaar. She is Program Manager Learning and Innovation and Assistant Professor at the Erasmus University Medical Center. Dr. Dankbaar.
Thank you. Dear candidates, first I'd like to congratulate you with your very interesting thesis. I think, I think you've performed some really well-designed research with very interesting conclusions. Also, I'm very pleased to see that the ABCD sim game, which we designed and developed together with the game company IJsfontein at the Erasmus Medical Center already 10 years ago now, is still an interesting and suitable learning environment to perform research on. My question is related to chapter 5, where you describe how in-action reflection is effective in simulation-based training of complex skills, especially in critical domains. And you describe very, very well that this is one of the functions to perform this in-action reflection is to optimize cognitive load and to restructure mental models. And that's an important finding for computer-based simulation training, I think. And you research individual learning, but in healthcare, team learning and team performance is a very important, is growing also in importance in healthcare. And that's why in face-to-face simulation training, we see often teams being trained, and this concept of taking a pause is often called time out. And you also are referring to this. It's similar to what you describe in taking a pause. You describe taking a time out also in your thesis. Sometimes it's called a team huddle, so a come together as a team, and it's in these trainings, it's considered an important method to improve decision making and to improve team performance. Terms that are being used in this situation is to take 10 seconds for 10 minutes. So just take a brief 10 seconds pause and you improve like at 10 minutes, or a team huddle. So it's taking a step back, looking at the emergency situation, creates shared situational awareness, etc. And my question is, could you translate perhaps your findings on how we can improve taking a pause and reflecting to this type of team timeouts? So how could we promote a team timeout in terms of effectiveness? What guidelines could you give us in translating your research findings in this?
Esteemed opponent, thanks for the great question. I find it very important to in expanding the finding from this project into teamwork. So if I understood correctly, your question is about how to interpret the findings from my project within more formal and teamwork-based timeouts training. So I suggest that the findings, the core findings of my project in training medical pause is that self-monitoring. So in teamwork or in team timeouts, there should be one designated person or manager who is monitoring the process itself, so that it should be some observer, or it can be team leader or someone else who can monitor their practice and notice when to take a pause and give the right information to provide during the pauses. That's the one thing that someone should take a role of team monitoring. And the second point that we can learn from this project is that understanding of the importance of pause first. So before you go for any practice of medical pause, the consensus or understanding why this is necessary should be already understood between the team members first. Then everything starts from that point. So they already know timeouts is important, what we have to do during the timeouts, and they already pre-trained what to do during the timeouts. And there is already well-developed checklist and protocols already in many diverse domains. So they can also utilize it and adapt it to their own practice itself. Then they can follow the leader or observer who can initiate the pause during the practice. So that's the 2 points I can suggest for formal and collective timeouts, that someone should be monitored and the team members should be share the ideas of timeouts. I hope this answered your question correctly.
Yes, it does. So you suggest that team leaders should monitor and decide to take a timeout, to take a pause as a team. And we developed a computer-based game performing teamwork. And could you suggest what guidelines you could provide if and these team leaders are students, they take the role of a team leader in this training environment. Sometimes they find it difficult to know what to do as a team leader. Okay, they take a time out, they press a button in our game. And what suggestion, if they find it difficult to know, how can I use this timeout to improve team performance, how to take a step back, to reflect on what is happening? Could you give some suggestions for the game designer on what to implement? You're talking about prompts in your thesis or questions, cues. Could you give some suggestions for the design?
Yeah, thanks for giving that question. So I understand it is difficult or even impossible for novices just start the role of leader in any simulation game or simulation training. It is that is one of the points that I suggested during the project, that they need scaffolding and support to learn how to initiate or lead the pause. So what I suggest for game designers or simulation system designers or developers to guide these novices in the skill of taking medical pause is that first, also what Agneta suggested, like giving them modeling, like it's also it's based on the idea of scaffolding. They need someone to model, someone who can supervise them. So it can be really best if the real teacher or supervisor in real life can guide while they are playing the game, and then point out when to pause and how to lead the timeouts. But it is not always possible or feasible. So what designers can implement is like pre-training. Before you go actual simulation, you can implement some pre-training session as a leader, or you can insert some videos how the experts actually make pause in this simulation, so that they can model the experts planning and improvising the pauses. And also it can be just-in-time support as well. So when it is really important to take a pause, the system or the computer-based simulation can prompt when to take a pause, even before the practice, like giving some examples, and even during the pause. And also what is the best is after the simulation as well, because the good advantage of computer-based simulation is they can repeat the same scenarios over and over. So in that way, it can maximize the advantage of using computer-based simulation, which is repeatability, and also implementing that guideline. They can practice as many times as possible. I hope it answered your question.
I have to interrupt here. We have to move on to the next opponent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dankbaar. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Assoudar. She is assistant professor at the Department of Educational Development and Research. Dr. Assoudar.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I really enjoyed reading your work, coming from an instructional design background, also trying to combine that with e-learning as an everyday work that I do here. I was really impressed by the work that you had done and how you had combined things together. I still have some questions for you, and I would like to ask these questions now here for further clarification. In chapter 5 is what I'm more referring to. And there you talk about the learners or the participants of your study doing think aloud while they have to perform something else as well. Now, your main focus is on cognitive load. Does this think aloud not add to the cognitive load of the participants? And I also see that 25% were not comfortable with that. Did you dig into why and how?
Esteemed opponents, thanks for the accurate pointing. I also, well, many researchers already notice if you ask participants to think aloud, there is extra cognitive load. There have been some previous studies or findings that can add some more cognitive load, of course. But in my my project, the added cognitive load during the self-reflection did not affect or confound the research output or result, because the goal of the study in chapter 5 is that how the self-reflection itself improve or affect the performance and cognitive load. And all of the participants experience the same procedures. And although it can add more cognitive load, it is still in the scope of the research question. So well, although I noticed the extra cognitive load during the self-reflection, it didn't affect that much for the research goal itself, which is comparing the two different conditions. And in the condition where the self-reflection and think aloud was applied, showed a significantly low cognitive load, while the other condition showed the opposite. And the think aloud was applied to the both. Like they, in the control condition, they had to think aloud about irrelevant task, which was not the specific scenario that I used. So that was how I assumed it wouldn't affect that much for the research goals. I hope this answered your questions.
Thank you very much, dear candidate. Yes, it did. I also have another question about this part, because I see that as you have also been explaining, that you give these pause moments for the participants to be able to reflect on what to do, how to improve, a moment of thinking, a moment of reflection. Then you have 83% of your participants saying these pauses were not useful to them because they didn't have the knowledge. So they had a pause moment, but they didn't have a knowledge, so they still didn't know what to do. And there was no expert feedback to help them continue along. How was this pause useful then?
In the experimental setups of chapter 5, the point of to compare was giving them guideline about how to take a pause. So I provided 3 types of guide or support, which is when to take a pause, like structuring the different part tasks by clustering them, and also what reflect on, by providing them recording of their own performance and their own eye movement scan path. And thirdly, I also provided leading questions. So what they have to question themselves to reflect on. Only one thing lack of is that feedback, as you also pointed out. So that was what I also discussed on in chapter 5. So I wanted to measure the effect of this guideline provided, like about when and how and what to do during the self-reflection, but not the effect of feedback itself. So that was also a good topic for the future study and future research, including that effect of feedback. So how can feedback be more beneficial, or whether confounding the effect of pause or self-reflection during the pause. So it's open to the future study, but not in the scope of the research question of chapter 5. So I hope this answered your question.
Thank you very much, dear candidate. It definitely did.
Thank you, Dr. Assadour. Sudar. The next opponent is Professor Heiligers. He is Professor of Medical Education and Training in the Teaching Hospital at Maastricht University. Professor Heiligers.
Thank you very much, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, first of all, my compliments to you and your team for this very important research with very clever experiments, I must say. It was very nice to read. Of course, I do have some questions, and let us not pause too long. My first question is about chapter 4. There you do an experiment with 2 groups and the computer-based simulation with a false available condition. And the participants were students medicine from year 2 and year 6. And you say, since the basics of emergency medicine are taught in the first year, you suggest that it might not be a big difference between year 2 and year 6. My question is, do you really think this is a homogeneous group? And don't you think you deny all the training ban of the 4 years in between?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for the question. If I understood correctly, what you wonder is that the selection of participants in chapter 4, experimental setups, where I selected medical students from year 2 to year 6, it could be a plausible selection of participants, and would it fit the research question itself? So the reason why I selected that specific group of people is that what I wanted in the experiment is that someone who has basic knowledge in emergency medicine, who can understand what the terminology means in the scenarios, and who can at least proceed the practice. So that's why it started from.
I understand very well that that's your goal, but I think when you're a 6th-year medical student, you do have a lot of experience, especially clinical experience, and therefore I think it's not so much a computer game that you're doing, but you're more related to the clinical situation. And do you think that it might be related to the 50% of people, of students that did not use the pause knob, and the 50% of this that said it's not a realistic situation? So don't you think that your results were influenced by the difference in the groups?
Okay, now I understood your question more correctly. So yeah, there is more higher academic years of students, and they, as you also corrected, it can be them who has higher experience, who perceived the pause as unnecessary or useless for this specific scenario. It is possible, but in my, I admit that it can be them. But in chapter 4, the point of the research goal was ask them why they didn't take a pause, or how they what they did during the pause when they are not that much experience, like after students level, and but there is also variance between students who have some more experience and who have less experience, of course. But it in this research question, it is comparing 2 groups, and I randomized and randomly distributed the participants in the 2 groups. So for this research purpose, it was enough to including that more experienced students and less experienced students. So it was within the research scope. But for your question, I admit that it can be them, but I didn't focus this experience affect this question. So I think it can be a good research question for future study. So who, or someone who have a higher experience, can perceive it differently
That's
So
a
it
good
can be a,
suggestion. That's a good suggestion. My question is, did you investigate the 20 students, the 50%, that did not use the pause knob, the pause button? Do you think it were especially the older year students or not? Or didn't you investigate it at all?
Firstly, in previous studies in other domains, it was investigated why many students don't take pauses. And it was mainly due to they didn't aware of the importance of pausing. So I assumed
here you found in 50% that it was because they thought it was not realistic. That were your own conclusions. So my question is, didn't you further investigate this group? It might be of interest to understand if this were, for example, the 6-year students or the older year students who had more experience and who thought they were more in a clinical situation instead of in a computer game.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it must be a very interesting research question for future study, that what type of experience or how much period of experience can affect their perception about the pausing. It can be a good research question further. But within my study, I assumed that it was because ignorance about pausing based on the findings from the previous studies. But that was the limitation of my research, because I didn't categorize them and relate it to their own answers for the questions. So that can be a very good research direction in further. So this.
Thank you very much for your answer. I do have a question also about the group activity. I'm an orthopedic surgeon myself, and I think nearly all important activities in the hospital are group activities of a team and not of an individual. It's like a string quartet. And I think when you have a string quartet and the first violin just stops, that doesn't make sense.
Hola, asked.
I'm sure, Mrs. Lee, you have noticed that the time for defending your thesis has passed. The committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis, and in particular the quality of your defense. And please await our return with the results of our deliberation. I see that you are all back. Mrs. Lee, can you hear me? Mrs. Lee, can you hear me? Mrs. Lee, can you hear me? No. Can you hear my voice? Is your audio working? Yes? Oh, good. Mrs. Lee, the degree committee, again, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes?
I hear you. Yes.
Fine. Mrs. Lee, the degree committee here present online has assessed the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. And in view of this positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. And not only that, they also grant you the title of cum laude. And Professor van Merrijenboer is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch University custom and law. I invite your supervisor now to take the floor. Professor van Merrijenboer.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible? You must answer.
Yes. Yes, I do.
So you promise. Okay. By the authority vested in us by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Joy Yeonjoo Lee, cum laude, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Okay, this will be sent to you shortly. Esteemed Dr. Lee, dear Joy, it is a great pleasure to be the first one to congratulate you with obtaining the doctor's degree. I do it also on behalf of the other members of your promotion team, Jeroen Donkers, and from the Open University of the Netherlands, Alska Jarotska. I can say on behalf of the whole team that it was an enormous pleasure to supervise you. You did your PhD project in the context of an NWO-funded project on the use of serious gaming in medical training, especially looking at additivity issues. This inter-university project was initiated by Miri Dankbaar in Rotterdam, also present here today, and we also collaborated with your direct counterpart, Tjitske Faber, who will defend her thesis later this year, and Walter van der Broek. I think we are looking back on a very successful project that started in September 2017 and that is now nearing its end. When you started your project on the 1st of September in 2017, many things were new for you. The Netherlands and Maastricht were new because you had a background in South Korea, Austria, and Sweden. Medical education was new to you. The Dutch PhD system was new to you. But you did have a background in eye tracking, and you can have an interest in cognitive psychology and how could it be applied in medical education. And it very quickly became clear that you were the perfect match for this serious gaming project. You made excellent contributions to technical issues and instrumentation, to theoretical progress, and to the impact of the project. Let's start with the technical issues. Eye tracking is not an easy field because the use of specific measures might require the development and implementation of algorithms that are context specific. Your background in computer programming was of course helpful, but even more important, you formed a dream team, I think, with Jeroen Donkers. And with his help, innovative measures of, for example, the systematicity and gameplay were developed. And furthermore, your technical skills were not limited to software, but also extended to hardware. You took VR classes apart, building in light cells and other pieces that had to be added. And I think you did even the soldering yourself. Yet it will be totally wrong to conclude that you are mainly a practical person. You combine different theoretical perspectives in your studies on the medical pulse. I think you really redefined the concept of the medical pulse in the literature. And nowadays, you are without doubt an expert on how the medical pulse can best be taught in simulation and game settings. Finally, you also advertise the broader project worldwide. The movie about the Xi eye tracking lab is one of the funniest movies presenting a lab that I've ever seen. And together with Mary, you initiated the IRSIM group that organized successful online meetings on simulation and gaming in medical education. And you also set up and further expanded collaborations with research groups in Lund, Regensburg, Kingston, New York, and probably forget a few more. Your activities were not only limited to the project, but you were also an active member of the department, the school, and ECO. For example, you made an important contribution to the organization of the International Cognitive Load Theory Conference that we organized in 2019 in Maastricht. Already in 2018, when you were still in the first year of your PhD studies, you advertised the Maastricht conference during the International Cognitive Load Theory in Beijing, in China. I admire your strong international orientation and your ability to make connections between different research groups in different scientific fields. I think you should really be extremely proud of yourself and be a bit less modest. And you know I always say that to you. Joy, in a few weeks, you will start a new job in the group of John Young at Northwell Health in New York. It is no surprise for me that you found a job in the network you created yourself. And actually, I'm a bit jealous of John that he caught you. But we will certainly stay in touch, and I'm looking forward to our future cooperation. Thank you.
Esteemed Dr. Lee, dear Joy, it's also my great pleasure to congratulate you with your doctorate and in particular with distinction cum laude, which is really very exceptional. And I congratulate you with the honor that you have required today. And I do that also on behalf of the Board of Deans of Maastricht University. And I would like to share some impressions of the committee with you. We have enjoyed your interesting and clear presentation. And with respect to your thesis, we have seen an excellent, exceptional, and very well-written thesis. You explored a new field of research and you have worked out innovative theoretical and practical aspects of this field of research. And it has been published in high quality journals. We were impressed by your defense. We have seen clear reflections. We have heard good suggestions about new research. And you have shown that you are very, very knowledgeable in the field of your research. And again, I congratulate you with the results that we have seen today in the forms of your thesis and your defense. And I would like to congratulate your 3 supervisors with that. They may be proud of you and of your results that we have seen. So congratulations to Professor Jeroen van Merrijenboer, to Professor Halska Jarotka, and Dr. Jeroen Donkers. Congratulations. And I would like also to include in my congratulations your parents and other members of your family, and also your colleagues and friends and all those who have contributed to your studies and in the final results that we have seen in the form of your thesis and your defense. And I wish you a successful professional career and a happy personal life. Before I close this academic ceremony, I would like to thank all the members of the Thesis Assessment Committee and of this degree committee. In particular, I would like to thank the external members and all opponents for their questions and interesting academic discussions. Maastricht University appreciates your contributions. And hereby I close this academic ceremony. And I think that now the live stream